realize them. Every woman I meet, I put up there. Because the longer I know her, the better I know her.
Hollywood's golden age sold America a perfect lie, and everyone bought it. For decades, Cary Grant was untouchable. Flawless charm, impeccable manners, the definition of the ideal gentleman. But what if that image was nothing more than a carefully engineered mask? What if the man behind the smile was hiding a life Hollywood was terrified to reveal? The truth didn't come from gossip columns or studio leaks. It came from Lee Marvin, a man who had survived real war, real blood, and real death. Unlike others, Marvin had no patience for illusions. And before he died, he left behind something far more dangerous than rumors: the truth. For years, Marvin spoke openly about Cary Grant. No one listened, no one wanted to. But when his secret diary finally surfaced, it revealed a side of Hollywood's most polished star that changes everything. And once you hear it, you can never see Cary Grant the same way again. Lee Marvin was never impressed by Hollywood polish. He didn't admire charm, didn't worship fame, and never trusted men who smiled too easily. That skepticism came from a life most movie stars never experienced. While others learned how to pose for cameras, Marvin learned how to survive gunfire, mud, and death as a U.S. Marine in World War II. When you've watched men die beside you, lies become easy to spot and impossible to tolerate. That was why Marvin stood out in old Hollywood. He wasn't acting tough. He was tough. The scars on his body were real, and so was the anger he carried toward an industry built on illusion. To Marvin, Hollywood wasn't a dream factory. It was a machine, one that crushed people quietly while polishing legends loudly. And no legend disturbed him more than Cary Grant. On the surface, Grant was everything Marvin despised: elegant, controlled, always perfect. Studios loved him because he never cracked. Audiences adored him because he never showed weakness. But Marvin saw something deeply unsettling behind that flawless image. He often said, "The more perfect a man appears, the more I want to know what he's hiding." Marvin didn't hate Grant. In fact, that's what made his observations so dangerous. He wasn't speaking out of jealousy or rivalry. He was speaking as a man who could sense fear disguised as confidence. According to Marvin, Grant was emotionally distant, painfully guarded, and constantly performing, even when the cameras were off. That kind of behavior, Marvin believed, only comes from someone protecting a truth too heavy to share. The whispers around Hollywood weren't new. For years, insiders quietly talked about Grant's private life, especially his long-term living arrangement with Randolph Scott. The two men shared a home for over a decade. Officially, they were labeled bachelor roommates. Unofficially, the rumors never stopped. Most people brushed it aside. Marvin didn't. In his private notes, Marvin wrote that what he observed between Grant and Scott went far beyond convenience or friendship. He described moments that felt intimate without being overt: prolonged silences, guarded glances, a closeness that didn't need explanation. To Marvin, it was obvious. This wasn't scandal for attention. It was a relationship that couldn't exist openly in an era where careers were destroyed by suspicion alone. Marvin believed Hollywood knew and chose silence. He once recalled seeing Grant late at night on a studio lot, sitting alone under harsh yellow lights. No audience, no co-stars, just a man stripped of his performance. Marvin wrote that Grant looked heartbreakingly beautiful and unbearably sad. His shoulders were tense, his expression hollow. When Marvin approached him, the conversation was brief, but unforgettable. Grant spoke quietly about never being allowed to live as the man he truly was. Those words stayed with Marvin for the rest of his life. Grant's pain, Marvin believed, wasn't weakness. It was survival. Every smile was calculated. Every marriage was strategic. Every public appearance was armor. In an industry that demanded perfection, Grant gave them exactly what they wanted at the cost of himself. Marvin saw this pattern repeatedly on set. Grant would charm everyone during breaks, making crew members feel seen and valued. But the moment they walked away, Marvin noticed something chilling. Grant's face would drop, just for a second, long enough to reveal exhaustion, tension, and a weight he carried constantly. Marvin once wrote, "A man only does that when he's guarding something he cannot afford to lose." And "Evaluated is a longer." That guard slipped publicly in 1980 when comedian Chevy Chase made a crude joke on television, calling Grant homosexual. To outsiders, Grant's reaction seemed excessive. He sued immediately and settled the case out of court. But Marvin understood. It wasn't about the insult. It was about control. Grant had spent his entire life managing an image, and that single word threatened to tear it apart. According to Marvin, Grant wasn't fighting rumors. He was defending the only life Hollywood allowed him to have. The deeper Marvin wrote, the clearer the picture became. Grant's emotional distance, his need for control, his perfectionism, all traced back to childhood. Born as Archibald Leach in England, Grant grew up in a broken home. His father drank heavily and eventually abandoned the family. Worse still, his mother was institutionalized when Grant was a child, and he was falsely told she had died. For years, he lived believing he had been completely abandoned. Marvin believed that lies shaped everything. A child who learns that truth is unstable grows into an adult who builds walls. Grant built his with elegance. He became a man no one could question, criticize, or truly know. Hollywood rewarded that transformation with fame beyond imagination, but it never allowed him peace. In Marvin's eyes, Cary Grant wasn't a villain. He was a prisoner, and Hollywood was his warden. As Marvin continued writing, one detail surfaced again and again: control. Cary Grant needed it the way other men needed air. Control over his image, control over his emotions, control over how close anyone was allowed to get. Marvin believed this obsession wasn't arrogance, it was fear. A man terrified that if the mask slipped even once, everything he had built would collapse. That fear followed Grant into his marriages. On paper, he married often. In reality, Marvin saw those relationships as carefully placed barriers. Each wife served a purpose: stability, normalcy, protection from rumor. But love, in its raw form, never seemed to survive. Several of Grant's former wives accused him of being emotionally cold, controlling, and distant. Some even hinted at darker behavior behind closed doors. Marvin didn't excuse any of it, but he understood it. He didn't know how to love, Marvin wrote, because he never learned how to forgive himself. To Marvin, Grant's relationships weren't failures of character. They were symptoms of a man split in two, the public idol and the private stranger. That split became unbearable as Grant aged, and eventually it drove him towards something unusual for a Hollywood legend of his time: LSD. Grant didn't use it recklessly. According to Marvin's notes, he approached it like a desperate man searching for relief. Over 100 sessions, not for pleasure, not for rebellion, but to strip away what he called the false self. Under the influence, Grant claimed he could finally breathe, finally exist without performance. "I am close to happiness," Grant once said, "by removing what isn't real." But even that escape came at a cost. Marvin wrote that Grant became difficult on set during this period, impatient, sharp-tongued, intolerant of chaos. He clashed with co-stars, openly criticized actresses like Joan Fontaine, and refused to work with directors who threatened his carefully balanced control. To outsiders, it looked like arrogance. To Marvin, it looked like a man barely holding himself together. Hollywood noticed, and quietly adjusted. Grant avoided unpredictable directors. He selected roles that reinforced the same refined image. The industry protected him not out of kindness, but out of necessity. Cary Grant wasn't just a man, he was a brand, and brands weren't allowed to unravel. Marvin found that hypocrisy unbearable. He saw it everywhere, not just in Grant, but across Hollywood's elite. That's why he constantly clashed with powerful directors and leading men. He despised chaos, masquerading as genius. He despised cruelty hidden behind authority. And above all, he despised men who demanded respect without earning it. Marvin's conflicts with directors like Sam Peckinpah and Michael Ritchie weren't about ego. They were about control who held it, and how it was abused. Marvin refused to surrender his authenticity to anyone. If a scene felt fake, he walked away. If a director humiliated actors, he threatened to quit. Hollywood labeled him difficult. Marvin wore it like armor. But perhaps the most revealing part of Marvin's diary wasn't about anger. It was about self-awareness. When Marvin wrote about being overshadowed by Gene Hackman, he didn't hide his jealousy. He examined it. He admitted the pain of watching a younger man absorb the spotlight. "I had to prove I still belonged," he confessed. That honesty separated Marvin from the very men he criticized. He didn't pretend to be pure. He just refused to lie. And that's why his words about Cary Grant carried weight. Marvin never claimed Grant was evil. He never portrayed him as deceptive by nature. Instead, he described a man shaped and damaged by an industry that demanded perfection at any cost. A man forced to bury his identity so deeply that even he struggled to reach it. In the final pages of his diary, Marvin wrote something that reframed everything. "I do not hate Grant. I saw his fragility. I saw the stone he carried just to survive a world that would never accept the truth." That line changed the tone of the entire confession. This was never about exposing scandal. It was about revealing consequence. Hollywood's golden age wasn't golden because it was kind. It was golden because it was ruthless, rewarding those who conformed and quietly destroying those who couldn't. Cary Grant survived by becoming a myth. Lee Marvin survived by rejecting one. And in the end, Marvin believed that truth, however uncomfortable, wasn't meant to shame anyone. It was meant to set them free. Even if freedom came too late. In the end, this story was never about destroying legends. It was about understanding them. Cary Grant lived trapped inside perfection. Lee Marvin lived free, but paid the price for telling the truth. One became a myth to survive. The other refused to become one at all. So ask yourself, were these men victims of fame or architects of their own prisons? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you value real stories behind Hollywood's golden lies, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with us, because the truth is far more fascinating than the legend.